The moment my brother called me broken, he was wearing our dead father's watch. He didn't know I was in the room. He didn't know a 4-star general was sitting at the table behind him. And he absolutely did not know that in approximately 90 seconds, every business deal he had spent 4 years building was going to collapse into the breadbasket in front of him. It was a Tuesday evening when I walked into Steak 48 Inches, Charlotte, North Carolina, and saw Derek holding a glass of scotch, laughing at his own joke, the Seiko on his left wrist catching the low restaurant light. My father had worn that watch every single day for 31 years. I stood near the entrance long enough to take stock of the table, 2 men in expensive suits I didn't recognize. 3 family members who served on the board of Webb Property Group, and Derek at the head position, gesturing broadly the way he always did when he was performing confidence rather than feeling it. The hostess offered to escort me. I told her I knew the way. I ordered water at a small table nearby, close enough to hear, and waited. Derek had texted me that afternoon, not an invitation, a warning. Don't do anything stupid tonight, Marcus. I have partners here. This is a big deal. Just let it go. I had stared at that message for a long time before I put my phone in my jacket pocket and drove to the restaurant anyway. He said times let it go. Times like what he had done was a misunderstanding. Like the last 14 months had been a minor accounting error rather than a calculated 4-year plan to take everything our father had built and make it his. I watched him perform for the table. And I thought about Dorothy Sims. Dorothy was 71 years old, had been our father's bookkeeper for 22 years, had kept every receipt and ledger and scrap of paper our father had ever handed her. She had called me the morning after I returned to Charlotte, her voice careful and measured, like someone delivering news they had been holding for a long time. Your father called me 3 weeks before he died, she said. He told me Derek had changed the trustee documents, and he didn't know how to reach you to tell you. He didn't want you distracted. Didn't want you losing focus while you were still over there. She paused. He died thinking you'd figure it out. He believed in you that much. I was sitting in my car when she told me that. I didn't say anything for almost a full minute. My father had known. He had found out what Derek was doing and chosen to stay silent not because he was weak, but because his son was in a combat zone and he would not send fear across an ocean to distract him. He protected me the only way he still could. And then he died. And Derek walked into that hospital room and became the grieving son, the responsible one, the one who handled everything while his little brother was halfway around the world following orders. My name is Marcus Webb, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army, Judge Advocate General's Corps. 18 years, 31 prosecuted cases, 11 deployments across 4 theaters of operation. Call sign, verdict. Not because I was arrogant about outcomes, because in 18 years of military prosecution, once I walked into a courtroom with a full case file, the verdict was not in question. It was a matter of time. I tell you this not to impress you. I tell you this because Derek had spent 14 months telling everyone who would listen that I was broken, that I was unstable, that the war had hollowed me out and left something unreliable behind. He told the family I needed protection. He told the trustee attorney that I lacked. And I'm quoting directly from his email, the psychological stability required for sound financial decision-making. I arrived back in Charlotte on a Thursday in November, 14 months after my father's funeral, which I attended via video call from a secure facility in Kandahar because my unit was in the middle of an active prosecution and I could not leave. I watched my father's coffin on a 6-inch screen with a 3-second audio delay. Derek was the one who carried the coffin. Derek was the one who spoke at the service. Derek was the one who shook hands with every relative, every neighbor, every old friend who came to say goodbye. I was the one in a folding chair in front of a laptop, unable to do anything except watch. I had told myself I would sort everything out when I got home. I would sit down with Derek, go through the trust documents, understand what had happened to the company, and work out a fair path forward. I had that plan for about 36 hours. Then I met with Gerald Pruitt, the attorney who managed my father's trust. His office was downtown Charlotte, 7th floor. The kind of law office that has original artwork on the walls and staff who never smile quite fully. He placed a 2-page document in front of me and folded his hands. I looked at it, then at him. He told me all detailed inquiries were handled through the trustee of record. I told him I was a beneficiary of the trust. He agreed. I told him I was entitled to a full accounting. He said that was a matter for the trustee. I said his name once, quietly, and reminded him I had prosecuted financial fraud cases for 18 years. He looked at the artwork on the wall behind my left shoulder and told me again, with the patience of a man in a very expensive chair, that all detailed inquiries went through Derek Webb. In the elevator, I read the 2-page summary twice. Even in 2 pages, the numbers were wrong. The trust had been valued at $2.3 million when my father died. The summary showed current assets of $1.1 million. 4 properties had been refinanced, 2 listed for sale. Webb Property Group showed 3 new board members I did not recognize. I walked to my car. I sat down. I didn't start the engine. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a small piece of paper, folded many times, soft at the edges from years of handling. I unfolded it. I got you, little brother. Always. Derek's handwriting. I was 14 when he wrote those words, the night our father lost his job at the plant. I had been terrified. Derek was 22, already working 2 jobs, and he had taken the time to slip a note under my bedroom door in the dark. I had kept it for 27 years. I folded it back up. Then I called a private attorney. Here is what 4 years of careful maneuvering looks like when you finally hold all the documents at once. My father's trust was established in 2019 as a standard estate planning measure, naming Robert Earl Webb as trustee, with Marcus James Webb as successor upon incapacitation or death. In March of 2022, that document was amended. My father was in the hospital. Stage 3 cardiac failure. The amendment named Derek Allen Webb as sole trustee, replacing the original succession language entirely. The attorney who drafted and witnessed the amendment was Thomas Gale, Derek's fraternity brother from NC State, who practiced estate law in a small office 15 miles outside Charlotte. There was no record that my father had been advised to seek independent counsel. There was no record that I had been notified of the change. My father signed that document 11 days before he died. When I showed this timeline to my private attorney, Claire Hendricks, a woman who had spent 20 years in estate litigation, she put the papers down carefully and said, "Marcus, I need you to understand that what I'm looking at here is not negligence. This was constructed. Someone who understood trust law sat down and built this." I told her I knew. She asked how I was so calm. In 18 years of prosecution, I had sat across from men who had stolen millions and destroyed careers. The calmest I ever was in a courtroom was when I had the most complete evidence. "Because I've been here before," I told her. Just on the other side of the table. Now let me give you the numbers, because numbers are where the truth lives. 14 months. That is how long Derek had been sole trustee. $2.3 million. That is what the trust held when my father died. $1.1 million. That is what remained by the time I returned. 6 properties refinanced. Combined new debt load of $680,000. 3 new board members added, without beneficiary consent. Derek's wife Angela, his college friend Raymond Castor, and a man named Phil Denton, whose only discoverable connection to real estate was that he had once listed a property Derek's church owned. My ownership stake in Webb Property Group. Originally 50% by the terms of my father's operating agreement. Current stake after 4 rounds of share issuance I had never been notified of. 18%. Below the threshold required to block any board resolution. Every single dilution had occurred during a period when I was documented as being in a combat or restricted communication zone. Coincidence does not schedule itself that precisely. But the number that stayed with me, the one I kept coming back to late at night with all the documents spread across my kitchen table, was not the $1.2 million. It was 11 days. My father had 11 days left to live when he signed that amendment. And Derek had been there, every day, sitting by the bedside, the good son, the one who was present, the one who held his hand. 3 days before the dinner at Steak 48, Derek called me. His voice was warm and practiced. He had heard I'd gone to see Pruitt, said Pruitt had called him, said I seemed confused about the trust structure. He suggested I come by the house on Saturday, said he'd walk me through everything. I told him sure. I had no intention of going to his house on Saturday. I had every intention of being at the restaurant on Tuesday, because Dorothy Sims had told me Derek was presenting the sale of 4 Webb Property Group assets, totaling $4.1 million, to 2 outside investors and 3 board members. A sale that, if completed, would remove the most liquid properties from the trust before any court order could freeze them. Derek had a timeline. So did I. I also want to tell you about Staff Sergeant Anthony Reeves, because his name was in my head that night, and it matters. He was 26, from Memphis, wanted to go to law school when he got out. He used to ask me questions about the JAG Corps during downtime, how it worked, whether it was possible to prosecute the right people if the right people had enough protection around them. I always told him, possible, just harder, but possible. Anthony was killed by an IED in October 2021, 2 months from the end of his tour. I tell you this not to make you sad. I tell you this because when I sat down at that table in Steak 48 and ordered water and watched my brother drink his scotch and wear my father's watch, I was thinking about Anthony, about what he used to say when I told him that difficult prosecutions were possible. He always said, "Then let's make it happen, sir." I need to tell you about the 3 moments. The 3 times Derek made me small in front of people who were watching, because each one tells you something about who he had become and how completely he had convinced himself that the story he was telling was the truth. The first was 6 weeks after I came home. Derek had organized a family gathering, warm and full, cousins and aunts, and the kind of family energy that looks like love and sometimes is. He introduced me around like I was a guest. An aunt asked what I was planning to do next. Before I could answer, Derek put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Marcus is taking it slow. He needs time to decompress. We don't want to pile anything else on him right now." He smiled at me when he said it. Warm, caring. Everyone nodded. Poor Marcus. Needed time. Needed rest. I stood there with a drink in my hand and said nothing, because I was still giving Derek the benefit of the doubt. Still carrying 27 years of times I got you, little brother. I said nothing. I remembered it. The second moment I found out by accident, when Claire Hendricks's discovery package arrived on a Wednesday morning containing 47 emails between Derek and Gerald Pruitt over the previous 14 months. Most were routine. Then there was one from 8 months ago. I will not read you the whole thing, but here's the relevant section, and these are direct quotes, not my interpretation. As you know, Marcus's post-deployment evaluation documented significant sleep disruption, hypervigilance symptoms, and difficulty with long-term planning and sustained concentration. While he is, of course, a valued family member, I think we both understand that the trust was structured as it was specifically to protect beneficiaries who may not be positioned to manage complex financial decisions independently. Given what Marcus has been through, I believe the current trustee arrangement continues to serve everyone's best interests, including his own. He had taken my post-deployment psychological evaluation, the mandatory one every service member completes, the one that cleared me to return to full active duty within 60 days, removed the clearance language, highlighted the phrases about sleep disruption and hypervigilance, and sent it to a civilian attorney with a cover letter about how I deserved to rest while the family took care of things. Not a single word of it was technically a lie. That was the craftsmanship of it. He had taken true things and arranged them into a shape that meant something completely different from the truth. I sat with that for a long time. Then I took out the folded piece of paper. "I got you, little brother. Always." I looked at it for a while. Then I folded it back up, put it away, and called Claire Hendricks. "File the motion," I said. "I already did," she said. "But Marcus, if Derek completes that sale before the freeze order goes through times I know," I said. "The order won't be in place until Thursday at the earliest." "I know. Are you going to that dinner? I'll let you know how it goes." The third moment was Tuesday night at Steak 48, and I have already told you where it ended. Let me tell you what came before the last sentence, because the build matters. The silver-haired investor had been asking Derek about the structure of Webb Property Group. Derek had been explaining smoothly, fluently, that the company was in strong hands, well-managed, positioned for growth. The investor asked about me. Derek smiled. Marcus just got back from his last deployment. 18 years. So you can imagine he's still finding his footing. Is he involved in the business? Not currently. Derek's tone was gentle, concerned, the tone of a man who loved his brother very much and was sadly managing a difficult situation. He came back different. The stress, the trauma, it takes a toll. We worry about him. We've had to be realistic about what he can handle right now. The investor said that was hard to see. Derek agreed. He sighed exactly the right length of sigh. Sad, but strong. That's why this structure matters, he continued. Strong leadership, clear governance. Marcus is a good man. He was a good soldier. But soldiers follow orders. They don't run boardrooms. That's just the reality. He picked up his scotch. The table agreed, and the woman behind him put her fork down. Major General Sandra Okafor, United States Army, retired, had been seated at the foretop directly behind Derek's table. She was in Charlotte for a contract signing with a litigation firm she was joining as a senior advisor, dinner with 3 of the firm's partners, a celebratory evening. She had been eating quietly, half listening to Derek's table the way you half listen to background noise in a restaurant, until she heard the word Times Boardroom. And then she turned. She told me later, weeks later, when we spoke at length about that night, that she did not immediately recognize my face. Charlotte is not Fort Bragg. I was in civilian clothes. 18 years changes a face. What she recognized was the posture. You sat the same way you sat in my courtroom in 2019, she said. Back straight, hands flat on the table, not looking at the person who was trying to diminish you. Looking slightly past them, like you were already 2 moves ahead. She said she had seen that posture exactly once before in her career, in a room full of senior officers and 1 junior prosecutor who was about to take down an $11 million fraud scheme, with nothing but a legal pad and 4 hours of testimony. She thought, that cannot be him. That cannot be Colonel Webb. Then she looked at me directly. I looked back at her, and she stood up. Here is what the table saw. A woman in her early 60s, silver-haired, the particular kind of compose that you cannot perform because it takes decades to settle into. A dark blazer, simple jewelry, no uniform. She crossed the 6 feet between her table and mine in about 4 steps. She stood beside my table. She looked at me for 1 full second. Then she said, quiet and clear, the way you say something when you know the room is listening and you want every word to carry, Colonel Webb. And she stood straight, and she saluted. Derek's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The silver-haired investor looked up from his menu. The 3 family board members went absolutely still. Sandra Okafor did not look at any of them. She looked at me. I stood. I returned the salute. Old habits are fast and permanent. General Okafor, I said. Good to see you, ma'am. She nodded once. Then she turned to Derek's table, not confrontationally, just the way you turn toward a group of people who are in the same room, and she said, pleasantly, the way you make small conversation at a business dinner, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to pay my respects. Colonel Webb prosecuted the most significant fraud case in JAG Corps history during my command. 31 cases over 18 years. 0 wrongful convictions. The Army doesn't produce many officers at that level. He's one of the finest legal minds I've encountered in 40 years of service. She nodded at me again. Then she walked back to her table, sat down, picked up her fork, and continued her dinner. The silence at Derek's table lasted approximately 7 seconds. 7 seconds is a long time when a room is listening. The silver-haired investor looked from General Okafor to me to Derek, and the expression on his face moved through several stages, very quickly interest, recalibration, something harder. He said, I'm sorry, I thought you said your brother was Times. Derek started to explain. The investor interrupted. That woman just called him Colonel. She said he prosecuted the largest fraud case in JAG Corps history. Derek set his glass down. Look, Richard, the point is Times, the investor said, very carefully. The point is that you told me your brother came back from service unable to handle complex financial decisions. Nobody at the table said anything. Then the investor reached across the table and, gently, without drama, moved the folder of contract documents to the far side of the table, out of reach. I think we should take a few days before we sign anything. His partner nodded once. Said nothing. Derek's mouth opened, then closed. I watched the family board members. The one who had looked at the tablecloth earlier, a cousin named Warren, who had worked for my father for 20 years before Derek restructured the board, looked at me for the first time all evening. His eyes said, thank God. I looked at Derek. He was looking at the watch. Not at me, not at the investors, at the watch on his wrist. The Seiko that had been ticking every day for 31 years, that my father wore to every meeting, every school event, every hospital appointment. Every day he spent building something from nothing so his sons could have more than he did. Derek stared at it like he was only now understanding what it meant that he was wearing it. I did not say anything to him. I stood up. I put 3 $20 bills on the table for the water and the table time. Then I reached over calmly, the way you do something you have been thinking about for a long time, and I unclasped the Seiko from Derek's wrist. He didn't resist. He just watched. I clasped it around my own wrist and felt the weight of it. Solid. Honest. I nodded at the table. Enjoy your dinner, I said, and I walked out. The parking lot outside Steak 48 smelled like rain and car exhaust, and the particular cold of a November night in North Carolina. I stood next to my car for a while and looked at the watch. There is a thing that happens in the moments after a long prosecution ends, after the verdict comes in, after the gallery settles, after the gavel falls, and the thing is finally over. It is not satisfaction. It is not happiness. It is something more like barometric pressure equalizing. I breathed. 9:47 p.m. Keeping perfect time. My phone was ringing. Derek. I turned the screen face down and put it in my pocket. Claire Hendricks called at 8:15 the next morning. The emergency freeze order had gone through the judge, signed it an hour prior. All Web Property Group assets locked, pending full trust disclosure. And then she told me Richard Emmons, the silver-haired investor, had called her office that morning asking who represented the Webb Trust minority interest. He wanted to meet. A man who managed a $200 million portfolio did not want his name attached to a trust dispute involving a decorated military officer. Marcus, she said. Whatever happened at that restaurant, it worked. I thought about General Okafor putting her fork down, standing up 4 words. I had help, I said. The hardest conversation came 4 days later. Derek showed up at my apartment at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, uninvited, having found my address through the family. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, the knock of a man trying very hard to appear in control of his emotions. I opened the door. He looked the way people look when they have not slept in several days and have been cycling through anger and guilt and landing, finally, at something closer to reckoning. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He had not shaved. He was not wearing the watch. I stepped back and let him in. He stood in the center of my living room looking at the documents on the kitchen table for a long time, then sat down. I poured him a glass of water and sat across from him. I convinced myself it was for your own good, he finally said. He told me that when our father was sick, he kept asking for me every day, and every time they tried to reach me, the connection was bad or I was in a restricted zone. And he kept asking. And you weren't there, Derek said. The words were not cruel. They were spoken with the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying them for a long time and no longer had the strength to frame them carefully. I told him I knew. And I was there, he said, every day. And he was afraid of what would happen to everything he built if neither of us were ready. And I told him I would handle it. And then you did, I said. Just not in the way he meant. He said it had started as protection. And for a long time he had actually believed that. I asked when he stopped believing it. He was quiet for a moment. The emails, he said. When I wrote those emails to Pruitt about your psyche, Val, when I saw what I'd written, I knew what I was doing and I did it anyway. I had been in enough confession rooms, in courtrooms, in interrogation suites, in the quiet offices where people finally told the truth because the weight of not telling it had become unbearable to know the difference between performance and actual reckoning. This was reckoning. It didn't erase anything. Reckoning never does. But it was real. You used the deployment, I said. Every time I was unreachable, every time I was in a zone where we couldn't communicate, you used that. You documented it. You built a case out of my absence. Yes. You told people I was unstable. Yes. You took Dad's watch. He was quiet for a moment. I missed him, he said. That's not an excuse. I missed him. My father had loved Derek. Had loved him the specific, complicated way you love the child who stays behind and carries the daily weight of things, while the other one chases something big and far away. Derek had given up a lot to stay. That was true. He had made sacrifices that were real, and that I'd perhaps never fully acknowledged. None of that justified what he had done, but it explained something about how a person arrives at a place like that, not in one decision, in 1,000 small ones, each slightly more justified than the last, until you are writing emails to attorneys about your brother's psychological instability, and you have convinced yourself it is an act of love. I told Derek I was not going to pursue criminal charges. Claire's motion would restore the trust to its original structure. He would need to step down as trustee. The properties that had been refinanced would be reviewed. The board composition would return to what our father intended. The investors from the dinner were not going to close that deal. Webb Property Group belonged to both of us. And I was not interested in buying him out or being bought out. I was interested in running it the way our father had built it. He asked if I would actually work with him after all of this. I looked at him carefully. I'd work with a version of you that doesn't exist yet, I said. The question is whether you can become that person. He didn't answer. I didn't expect him to. Some questions need more than a conversation to answer. He stood up, looked at the documents on the table one more time, then looked at me. The watch, he said. It should always have been yours. I know, I told him. He left. 3 weeks later, Claire Hendricks and I sat across from a judge in Mecklenburg County and watched a court-appointed independent trustee take formal control of the Webb Trust pending final restructuring. Derek was present. He did not contest the order. General Okafor testified by written declaration, 3 paragraphs, precise, devastating in their clarity, confirming my professional background and the nature of our working relationship. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. Richard Emmons provided a separate written statement describing the representation Derek had made about my fitness for financial decision-making, noting it was inconsistent with the documented record. Gerald Pruitt voluntarily recused himself and referred the matter to the state bar. The trust was restored to its original valuation framework. The refinanced properties were flagged for remediation. The 3 board appointments were vacated pending review. It was not dramatic. Courtrooms rarely are. It was paperwork and procedure and a judge who asked clear questions and received clear answers. After it ended, Claire walked with me to the parking garage and asked what now. I told her I had a meeting the following week with the 3 remaining Webb Property Group employees who had been there before Derek restructured the board. I was going to tell them their jobs were secure, that the company was going to be run the way my father ran it, and that if anyone had concerns going forward, my door was open. She asked about Derek. We'll see, I said. She accepted that. She was a good enough attorney to know that some answers take longer than 3 weeks. About a week after the hearing, I drove to the house I grew up in. My father's house on Willow Creek Drive, a modest 2-story in a quiet neighborhood that had been slightly nicer when we were children and was now slightly shabbier in the way that honest neighborhoods age. The house was empty, unoccupied since my father went into the hospital, held in the trust. I had a key. I walked through the rooms. The kitchen still had the same yellow curtains my mother had hung before she left when I was 9. The den still had the bookshelves my father had built himself from lumber and YouTube tutorials and stubbornness. The hallway outside the master bedroom still had the nail hole where the family portrait had hung until the frame fell during a thunderstorm, and my father never got around to rehanging it. I stood in that hallway for a long time. There is a difference between coming home and coming back. Coming back is logistics. Flights, boxes, keys, leases. It is the mechanical process of returning your body to a place it used to be. I had been doing that for 3 weeks, managing and litigating and reconstructing. Coming home is something else. It is standing in the hallway of your father's house and understanding, finally, that the things worth protecting were never the properties, or the trust, or the company. They were the yellow curtains, and the handmade bookshelves, and the nail hole in the wall, and the 31 years of a man who went to work every day and built something honest because he wanted his sons to have a place to stand. I checked the watch. It was keeping perfect time. My father always said, "This watch never lied about the time. Neither should you." I used to think that was a lesson about honesty, about truth-telling. I understand now that it was a lesson about precision, about knowing exactly where you stand, exactly what time it is, exactly what is true, and refusing to adjust any of those things for the comfort of the room. Derek had spent 4 years telling the room what it wanted to hear. I had spent 18 years in courtrooms where that was not allowed. People sometimes ask me if I regret not pursuing criminal charges. The honest answer is, sometimes. At 3 a.m., on bad nights when the sleep doesn't come and I'm thinking about the 11 days before my father died and the things Derek did in that room. Sometimes, yes. But here is what I know about prosecution after 31 cases in 18 years. The point of accountability is not punishment. The point of accountability is precision. Establishing exactly what happened, exactly who did it, and exactly what must change. Derek knows exactly what he did. He will live with that knowledge in a way that no sentence could replicate. The company is being restored. The trust is protected. My father's name is on the building, and that is where it will stay. And I am standing in his house in the neighborhood where I grew up, wearing his watch, with clear eyes, and a complete case file, and the particular kind of peace that only comes when the truth is finally the only version of events in the room. Anthony Reeves used to say, "Make it happen, sir." I did, Anthony. I did. The folded piece of paper times I got you, little brother. Always times I still have it. I know that might surprise you. After everything. But here is what I understand now that I didn't before. Derek wrote those words when he was 22 years old and genuinely meant every one of them. The person who wrote that note and the person who filed those emails are not two different people. They are the same person, changed over time by fear and resentment and the slow corrosion of watching someone leave while you stayed behind. I cannot hate that person. I grew up with that person. I ate breakfast with that person 10,000 times. That person drove me to my first day of law school, sat in the back of the room, and cried when I was commissioned. What I can do, what I choose to do, is hold both things at once. The note and the emails. The brother who meant it and the brother who betrayed it. The truth of who he was and the truth of what he did. That is not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever, fully. But it is precision. And precision, my father always taught me, is where honesty lives. I put the note back in my jacket pocket, looked around the hallway one last time, made sure the house was locked, and drove home in the quiet November dark of Charlotte, North Carolina. The watch kept perfect time all the way.